My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said with a smile, "Old people don't deserve love." The words cut through me like a knife, but I stayed quiet and closed the door. What she didn't know was that the very next morning, her own name would appear on the front page of the newspaper, and everything in our house would change. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Margaret Turner, but most people call me Maggie. I am 72 years old, a widow, and after losing my husband, I moved in with my son Andrew, his wife Vanessa, and my granddaughter Emily. I never wanted to be a burden, so I tried to keep to myself, helping with the cooking, folding laundry, and tending the little garden out back. I believed that if I stayed useful, maybe I could still belong. Andrew works long hours and doesn't speak much about the past. Vanessa, his wife, is sharp-tongued and proud. She likes to remind me that I am old, and in her eyes, being old means being in the way. My granddaughter Emily is my closest friend in the house. She is 19, bright, and kind-hearted. She listens to me, hugs me when I feel small, and reminds me that not everyone forgets the value of family. Life in their home was not easy. I often overheard Vanessa making comments under her breath, remarks about my age, my wrinkles, even the way I walk. She believed old people belonged in silence, tucked away where no one had to see them. I carried her words in my chest like heavy stones, never letting Andrew know how deeply they hurt me. I didn't want to cause arguments between him and his wife, but one night, she crossed a line. As I stood in the hallway, she looked at me with a smile that held no kindness at all and said, "Old people don't deserve love." For a moment, I thought my heart would stop. I wanted to defend myself, to remind her that I had lived through decades of love, sacrifice, and care for this family. But instead, I turned and closed the door quietly, swallowing the pain. I lay awake that night, replaying her words, and for the first time in years, I wondered if maybe I really had become invisible. Yet, what none of us knew was that life had prepared a different kind of answer, an answer that would make Vanessa eat her words in front of everyone. After that night, Vanessa's words replayed in my head over and over again. Old people don't deserve love. It didn't matter how much I tried to push them away. They came back like an echo that wouldn't stop. I had lived through decades of joy, heartbreak, and sacrifice. Yet in that one sentence, she made me feel like none of it mattered anymore. I didn't say anything to Andrew, though. My son already carried the weight of a demanding job and a tense marriage. I couldn't bring myself to add more to his shoulders. So, I kept my silence. But silence has a way of growing heavier each day. The next morning, when I set the table for breakfast, I noticed Vanessa watching me with that same cold smile. She didn't have to say anything. Her eyes alone told me what she thought of me, an old woman taking up space in her house. Andrew buried himself in the newspaper, sipping his coffee, while Emily reached across the table to squeeze my hand gently. She didn't need words to know I was hurting. As the days passed, Vanessa's small remarks became sharper. She told Andrew, "Your mother can't handle chores anymore. She'll just slow us down." She told Emily, "Don't waste too much time with your grandma. You should be focusing on your future." Every sentence was meant to push me further into the shadows. I tried to remind myself that I still had value, that I was still the woman who raised a son, loved a husband, and built a life. But when you hear the same thing enough times, it starts to feel true. One evening, I overheard her speaking on the phone to a friend. She was laughing loudly, her voice dripping with cruelty. Can you believe she still talks about love at her age? Old people don't deserve love. They're just done. I froze in the hallway, my chest tight. Her words weren't just careless. They were a deliberate attempt to erase me, to make me believe that my story was already finished. I slipped back to my room quietly, holding back tears. That night, Emily found me sitting on the edge of my bed, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "Grandma," she whispered, "don't listen to her. You are the strongest person I know. You raised Dad. You've lived through things she couldn't even imagine. You deserve love more than anyone." Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with sincerity. I hugged her tightly, grateful that at least one person in that house saw me for who I was. The turning point came unexpectedly. A few days later, as I stepped outside to collect the mail, I noticed an envelope addressed to me. The handwriting wasn't familiar, and for a moment I wondered if it was a mistake. But when I looked closer, I saw the letterhead from the local community organization I used to volunteer with years ago. My heart skipped. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a letter congratulating me. They wrote that I had been chosen to be honored at their upcoming event for my years of volunteer service and dedication to helping others. They even mentioned that a feature about me would soon be published in the town newspaper. For a long moment, I just stood on the porch, staring at the words, hardly believing them. I had almost forgotten those years. Before Richard passed away, I had given much of my time to the community center, organizing food drives, helping young mothers, visiting the elderly who had no family. To me, it was simply what people should do, care for one another. I never thought anyone would remember. Yet here it was in black and white, proof that my life still mattered, that I had made a difference. When I walked back inside, I kept the letter close to my chest. Vanessa was sitting in the living room scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up at me. Andrew was reading in his chair. Emily noticed right away that I was holding something, her eyes full of curiosity, but I didn't say a word. For the first time in a long time, I had something they didn't know, something that was mine alone. That night, I lay in bed, turning the letter over in my hands again and again. Vanessa's words about old people not deserving love felt smaller now, weaker. They were just empty words. This letter, though, this was truth. Still, I wrestled with doubt. Should I tell them? Should I show them? Or should I keep it to myself and wait until the world revealed it for me? As I drifted to sleep, I realized that this letter was more than just an invitation or an award. It was a quiet weapon against cruelty, a reminder that my story wasn't over. And though I had kept silent for so long, deep down, I knew that silence could no longer protect me. Something was about to change, and the next chapter would not be written by Vanessa's insults. It would be written by me. The letter sat on my nightstand for 2 days. Each morning, I picked it up, traced the words with my fingers, and set it down again. My heart ached with both excitement and fear. Part of me wanted to run straight to Emily and tell her everything, but another part of me hesitated. For years, I had been made to feel invisible. What if this honor was nothing more than a small mention? What if it wasn't as important as it felt to me? I was so used to being dismissed that even good news felt fragile, as though it could vanish the moment I spoke of it. On the third evening, Emily came into my room quietly. She had noticed how often I held the envelope, and her sharp young eyes missed nothing. "Grandma," she asked softly, "what is it? You've been hiding something." I handed her the letter with trembling hands. She read it quickly, and then her face lit up. "This is incredible. They're honoring you for everything you've done. Grandma, this is huge. Why didn't you tell anyone?" I smiled faintly, because I wasn't sure anyone would care. Around here, I've been made to feel like my life is over, like I've already given everything I could. Emily shook her head firmly, her voice full of conviction. "That's not true. You've given more than anyone. You taught me how to be kind. You showed me what family is supposed to mean. Grandma, you can't hide this. You need to stand up and let them see who you really are." Her words struck me deeply. I had been silent for so long, keeping peace at the cost of my own dignity. But Emily's faith in me was like a spark in dry wood. It caught quickly and refused to be ignored. That night, I made a decision. I would attend the event. I would walk into that hall, stand before strangers and neighbors alike, and let my story be told. When the day arrived, Emily helped me choose an outfit. She picked a simple navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years, one my late husband had always admired. As I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. For months, I had seen only the lines of exhaustion and the weight of grief. But that morning, I saw something else. Strength returning to my posture, light creeping back into my eyes. Emily drove me to the community center where the event was being held. The building was filled with people, Volunteers, families, and local leaders. I felt a wave of nervousness as we entered, but Emily squeezed my hand and whispered, "You belong here." When my name was called, I walked slowly to the podium. The crowd clapped politely, and for a moment I hesitated, unsure if I had the right to speak. But then I remembered Vanessa's words. Old people don't deserve love. My chest tightened, but instead of breaking me, those words gave me fire. I lifted my chin and began. "I never expected to be here today," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook slightly. Most of my life I thought the work I did, helping neighbors, serving meals, visiting those who were alone, was just small, ordinary kindness. But kindness is never small. It leaves a mark, even when you don't notice it yourself. The room grew quiet. Faces turned toward me, listening. I continued. "In a world that often forgets its elders, I want to remind everyone that love does not vanish with age. It grows deeper. We may slow down, we may change, but we do not lose our worth. Love and dignity are not something you outgrow." By the time I stepped down, the applause was warm and genuine. I could see pride in Emily's eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen. That night, a local reporter asked to take my picture and write a small feature for the newspaper. I agreed, though part of me still struggled to believe it was real. On the drive home, Emily leaned against me and whispered, "Grandma, tomorrow morning when the paper comes out, you won't just be my hero. Everyone will know who you are." I smiled quietly, my heart full. For so long, I had closed doors and swallowed words, letting others define me, but not anymore. This time, the world would hear my story, and more importantly, so would the people who had tried to silence me. The morning after the ceremony, the house was quiet. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the sunlight stretched across the dining table. I sat silently in my chair, my hands folded in my lap, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. The newspaper lay outside on the porch, waiting to be picked up. I knew what was inside it. My face, my name, my story. And soon, everyone else would know too. Andrew fetched the paper as he always did, flipping casually through the pages while sipping his coffee. Vanessa sat across from him, scrolling on her phone, barely glancing in my direction. Emily was next to me, her excitement impossible to hide. She tapped her foot under the table, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds, as though she was waiting for fireworks. Finally, Andrew unfolded the front page, his brow furrowed, then slowly lifted. "Well, would you look at this?" he muttered. Vanessa barely glanced up. "What now?" she asked flatly. He turned the paper around, and there it was. My photograph, right on the front page. The headline read, "Local Widow Honored for Lifelong Service and Community Leadership." Emily gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth. Andrew stared at me, shock written across his face. And then Vanessa's eyes finally lifted from her phone. She froze. Her lips parted, her face drained of color. She leaned forward, snatched the paper out of Andrew's hands and stared at it as though her world had tilted. It was me, my picture smiling back at her, my name bold in print. The article described my decades of volunteer work, my years of service to the community, and the recognition I had received the night before. It praised me for my kindness, my resilience, and my dedication to helping others. The words on the page stood in direct opposition to everything Vanessa had ever thrown at me. She slammed the paper down on the table, her voice sharp. "Why didn't you tell us about this?" I looked at her calmly, my teacup steady in my hands. "Because I didn't need to. I wasn't waiting for your approval." Her face twisted with frustration. "You let me sit here and—" She stopped herself, but the unspoken words hung heavy. "You let me mock you. You let me treat you like you were worthless." Andrew cleared his throat, still staring at the paper. "Mom, I didn't know you did all this. Why didn't you ever say anything?" I turned to him, my voice gentle but firm. "Because I was busy living it. I never thought I needed recognition. I only wanted to help where I could. But now, I suppose, the truth has a way of showing itself." Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes sparkled with pride. "I told you, Grandma. Everyone knows now. Everyone can see who you really are." Vanessa sat back in her chair, her voice dripping with disbelief. "This doesn't change anything. You're still—" I cut her off, my voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. "It changes everything. You told me old people don't deserve love. You made me feel like my life was over. But this, I said, tapping the paper with my finger, proves that love doesn't disappear with age. Respect doesn't vanish just because you want it to. I have worth, Vanessa. I always have. For the first time since I had moved into their home, she had no reply. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She lowered her eyes, the color in her cheeks rising, shame spreading across her face. Andrew folded his arms, his tone heavier now. Vanessa, you've been cruel to her. We both know it. I stayed quiet, but I shouldn't have. Mom deserves better. She always did. The silence after his words was powerful. Vanessa's eyes widened as if she had been betrayed, but I could see the truth in Andrew's face. For years, he had avoided conflict, but the newspaper had shattered his excuses. He could no longer pretend not to see the woman sitting at his table, the woman the entire town now recognized. I sat straighter, my shoulders lighter than they had been in months. For the first time, I felt like I had reclaimed a part of myself that Vanessa's cruelty had buried. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The truth was in print, undeniable even to her. Emily leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "They can't take this from you. Not ever." I smiled softly and kissed the top of her head. "No, they can't. This is mine." As Vanessa sat in silence, the newspaper between us, I realized that I had not only proven her wrong, I had freed myself from her grip. She could no longer define me, no longer cage me with her words. The world had seen me for who I was, and that was enough. That morning at the breakfast table, everything shifted. The balance of power, the respect in the room, even Andrew's loyalty. For once, it wasn't Vanessa's voice that carried authority. It was mine, carried by the weight of truth inked on paper for all to see. The days that followed the newspaper feature were unlike anything I had expected. For so long, I had lived in quiet corners, shrinking myself to keep the peace, believing that my voice no longer mattered. Now, suddenly, neighbors stopped by to congratulate me. Letters arrived in the mail, thank you notes from people I barely remembered helping years ago. Old friends called to say they had seen my story and felt proud to know me. The recognition wasn't about fame or attention. It was a reminder that the little acts of love and service I had given over the years had truly left a mark. Inside the house, however, the air had changed. Andrew walked differently around me now. Where once his eyes avoided mine, they now lingered with guilt and respect. He began asking about my past work, about the people I had helped, about the events I had been part of. I could tell he was beginning to see me not just as his aging mother, but as a whole person with a history larger than his memory of me. One evening, he admitted, "Mom, I didn't realize how much you've done. I should have defended you long before this." His words didn't erase the pain of silence I had endured, but they soothed a wound that had been open for too long. Vanessa, on the other hand, was quieter. The woman who once had sharp words for me now avoided confrontation. She never apologized directly, but I noticed her voice losing its edge. She no longer made cutting remarks at the table, and though her pride kept her distant, her silence was its own form of acknowledgement. She had mocked me, dismissed me, and tried to erase me, but the truth in print had stripped her power away. There are some things you cannot argue with, and the front page of a newspaper was one of them. Emily, my sweet granddaughter, glowed with pride. She told everyone she knew about her grandmother's story. At school, she carried a copy of the newspaper folded in her backpack, showing it to friends and teachers. One afternoon, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Grandma, you're the kind of person I want to be." Those words meant more than any article ever could. For me, the greatest change was internal. I had walked into that house months earlier, feeling like a shadow of myself, treated as though my life's best chapters had already been written. I had been told that old people don't deserve love, and I nearly believed it. But the recognition reminded me of something I should never have forgotten. Love isn't something you outgrow, and worth isn't something you lose with age. Dignity is not given by others. It is claimed by how we choose to live. I no longer tiptoed through the house. I spoke when I wanted to, laughed when Emily made me smile, and carried myself with the quiet assurance that I belonged, not because Vanessa allowed it, but because I existed with value no one could take away. I started writing down my memories, recording the stories of people I had met through my volunteer work, so that Emily and future generations would know them. Each page felt like another step in reclaiming the voice I had hidden for too long. The cabin of silence I had built around myself was gone. In its place was a stronger version of me, the woman who had endured grief, cruelty, and invisibility, yet had risen again with quiet strength. I realized that sometimes we cannot choose the way people treat us, but we can choose how we respond. We can choose to either sink beneath their words or rise above them with our truth. As I reflect on everything, I see now that the letter, the event, and the newspaper weren't just about recognition. They were about freedom. They freed me from believing the lie that my age made me irrelevant. They freed me from the cage of Vanessa's cruelty. They reminded me that love, respect, and dignity are not tied to youth. They are earned through a lifetime of living fully, even when no one is watching. To those listening to my story, I want to leave this message. Never let anyone convince you that you are finished. No matter your age, your worth is still alive, your love still matters, and your story is still being written until your last breath. I am Margaret Turner, and I am no longer silent. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I would love to hear your stories too.